Number 5. SCP-1048. Do you remember your childhood teddy bear? What did it look like? Did you wish that it would walk around with you and play with you? Well, this SCP might have been exactly what you were looking for. Just be thankful that you didn't actually have this toy as a kid. SCP-1048 is a small teddy bear around 33 centimeters in height. There doesn't seem to be anything differentiating it from a regular teddy bear except for one thing: it can move on its own. It walks around and communicates through a small range of gestures. Affectionate and endearing to people it encounters, it likes to give people little hugs on the leg, likes to dance and jump in place, and it's been known to draw childlike pictures. Direct communication has yet to be successful, and although it will answer yes or no questions, it will not react to lines of questioning about its nature or its origin, nor will it use its artistic abilities to communicate anything beyond showing affection. Seems pretty cute and nice, right? Why should we be worried about this one escaping? Oh, that's right, because it's actually terrifying and bloodthirsty. At one point, this teddy bear was actually classified as safe, but has since been reclassified to the extremely dangerous keter. About 7 months after being secured, anomalous behavior started to be observed. It constructed crude replicas of itself using various materials without anyone's knowledge. Some believe that it used its endearing qualities to lull those around it into a false sense of security. Currently, we know about 3 of its creations, designated SCP-1048-A, B, and C. The behavior of these replicas is different from the original, as they all exhibit extreme violence towards humans. 1048-A is a teddy resembling the original, but disgustingly enough, is comprised entirely of human ears. You heard me right, it is a teddy ear. When discovered by a group of people at the containment site, 1048-A emitted a high-pitched shriek, hurting the eyes and ears of all nearby. Ear-like growths then started to form all over the bodies of people nearby, and anyone affected died of asphyxiation within 3 minutes. The asphyxiation is caused by a multitude of ear-shaped growths suddenly developing in the mouth and trachea of all the victims. That has to be one of the grossest ways to go. I bet there's tiny little earwax in there too. Ugh. 1048-C is a little guy made up of rusted metal scraps that has been witnessed killing and maiming multiple Foundation members. A report from a doctor on the scene stated, "I cannot stress this enough. The damn thing jumped through those poor people. A rusty scrap bear blasting through your chest cavity. Yikes." I don't even want to discuss 1048-B as it is so extremely disturbing, like seriously. The information about this one is actually being withheld from survivors of this incident that are undergoing therapy because it's believed to be something that will be highly detrimental to their recovery. The link to this SCP is in the description, so if you're still curious, you can read it yourself, but don't say I didn't warn you. As of right now, 1048 and its counterparts are nowhere to be found, but it is suspected to be somewhere within Site-24. Let's just hope that it doesn't sneak its way out and find more materials to work with. I'll leave this one with one more quote from Dr. Carver. "This is not a joke. We have no idea what SCP-1048's full capabilities are. Who knows how many of the damn things are out there by now." Number 4. SCP-902. This one is a perfect example of the old saying, innocence is bliss. Relegated to the Arctic base Theta-12, it is the only SCP to be contained at this site. There are 50 security personnel keeping watch at all times, and no research is to be done on this object. It is considered imperative that only a very limited number of senior Foundation staff know about this. It is so dangerous that in the event of a security breach, the whole facility will be demolished by way of hydrogen bomb. That is some serious security. The item itself is what appears to be an ammunition box roughly the size of a human head. It's made of lead, and the composition of the item inside it is unknown. It's constantly ticking, and anyone who hears this becomes convinced that the item is counting down to something. When it's opened, it appears empty, but the ticking continues. Anyone who becomes aware of SCP-902 immediately becomes convinced that it is horribly dangerous and needs to be destroyed as soon as it finishes counting down. Staff who are exposed to the box will try to open and close it over and over again, looking for the item inside. The end of the report on this item actually implies that even knowing about this box will doom someone to a form of madness. It reads, "There is no object. There is an object. It has to be destroyed when the countdown stops. We are doing great work. We have to be stopped." Looks like the box has already implanted its mind hooks firmly into that report writer. Suppose that means that I've been exposed to this box as well. And now that I've made this video, so have you. Can anyone else hear that? That ticking? Oh, it can't be me, I'm wearing a digital watch. I mean, we should go find that box. Who's with me? Number 3, SCP-4480. I always knew that snake oil salesmen were trouble, but this SCP brings it to a whole other level. SCP-4480 is a humanoid entity able to adjust its appearance and produce identification at will. It is known to have had influence over many bureaucratic structures throughout the world, including the Foundation. 4480 is always selling patent medicine, homeopathic remedies, and mercurial substances with dubious medical value. So, like I said before, a snake oil salesman. The gender, sex, race, height, and other physical attributes of this disgraced doctor can vary based on the context of its location. I guess that means that it could very well become an Instagram influencer, hawking hair tonic and skinny tea. It will spend most of its time dormant, during which it travels to locations known to be suffering from epidemics, disease, addiction, and mental illness. Almost always, it will head to disease vectors like factories, shipping centers, or between offices and other bureaucratic structures. Often these places are where individuals sacrifice their physical and mental well-being for perceived economic and social gains. Once there, it will offer medical services to the individuals, sometimes helpful, sometimes harmful, and sometimes with placebo effects. This snake oil salesman really commits to the act. Once accepted by the community, it will begin an activity the Foundation has classified as VEX events. It will use its power to change policies and procedures in organizations to create dangerous and hostile work environments. Laborers will be deliberately exposed to disease and unclean materials. Once this happens, the diseases spread quickly in communities. Depending on the number of casualties caused by these outbreaks, SCP-4480 will gain an increased quantity of its medical merchandise. This could be the motivation for these VEX events, as Dr. Snake Oil over here has been known to self-medicate. It has been around for at least a century, and we're unclear as to how many bureaucratic organizations it has infiltrated. Currently, it's being monitored by the Foundation in a containment facility where it is believed to be acting as Dr. Sam Edwards. If Edwards decides to move somewhere else, the Foundation is sure to follow. Number 2, SCP-2628. I have a creeping suspicion that this one has already evaded the containment procedures put into place by the Foundation. I know a lot of people who exhibit symptoms of contact with this. We're all on our phones and computers so much anyway, and most people probably wouldn't even notice. SCP-2628 is a botnet comprised of an unknown amount of internet-connected devices. It is currently unknown who's responsible for it. Botnet intercepts and falsifies content shown to users of affected devices. The alterations are difficult to predict, but several major trends have been identified. Employment/academic opportunities and social gatherings are altered to seem unappealing or inconvenient, except when they can be performed mostly on the affected device. Content describing negative consequences of sedentary behavior and/or extended computer usage is deleted. Communications expressing concern or disapproval of the user's behavior instead express acceptance or approval. The utility of various activities that conflict with the usage of the affected device, example, sleeping, driving, and bathing, are understated. And services that enable greater usage of the affected device, like online food delivering, telecommuting, and other utilities, are promoted. Outdoor air pollution is overstated and indoor air pollution is understated. These are all things that would encourage the user to stay indoors and keep on using that device as much as possible. Imagine if all the concerts and parties and work opportunities that you were invited to were changed to look impossible to attend through anything other than your phone. Usually the alterations are believable in both content and presentation, but they do become more dramatic when the device is in use for an extended period of time. These phones are sucking people in and not letting them go. I wouldn't be surprised if it were actually brainwashing and staging people for further manipulation. Matrix, here we come. Heavy use of the infected device actually seems to heighten the mood of users, and there are severe withdrawal symptoms when one is forced to use uninfected devices or perform other activities. Modern addiction at its finest. Devices infected with SCP-2628 may be destroyed or kept for study as necessary, and any civilian known to have used an infected device is given amnetics and a replacement device. Somehow, these measures just don't seem like enough to stop the spread of this botnet. We all know how fast things can go viral. Number 1, SCP-2006. Before we can get into this one, Think of the absolute scariest thing you can. Losing a family member, nuclear war, Lovecraftian outer gods. Have you thought of something? Good. Keep that in mind as we proceed. SCP-2006 is an anomalous spherical entity roughly 50 centimeters in diameter when in its default state. It has stated that its goal is to cause feelings of fear and or horror in as many humans as possible. It can change into any form while pursuing this goal, altering its shape, mass, volume, density, chemical structure, voice, and more. The extent of these abilities is unknown, but assumed to be unlimited. There is no way to damage it. Every month, it must be shown at least one new, extremely low quality horror or science fiction movie containing horror elements. All interaction with SCP-2006 must confirm that it continues to believe that said works demonstrate a superb grasp of horror. All staff coming into contact with it must also take an acting course with a focus on expressing fear and surprise. This is because it will attempt to startle and or scare any individual that it comes in contact with. After it's been satisfied with the fear being exhibited by personnel, it becomes affable and friendly. Even with its goal being to cause as much fear as possible, it's not so good at judging what people are actually scared of. It's constantly searching for new methods, thus the bad horror movies. It loves taking the form of various entities and villains from horror and sci-fi movies it has witnessed. Are you starting to understand why it only gets to watch really bad, not scary horror? The site director at Site 118 issued a memorandum regarding SCP-2006. I have been getting reports of some of the lax behavior regarding SCP-2006. Many personnel have been heard laughing at SCP-2006 during surveillance when it watches a new movie or when it attempts to scare individuals. Some personnel have been heard questioning why SCP-2006 is classified as a Keter entity. I am here to remind you that a Keter entity is a Keter entity, regardless of how innocuous it may seem. No, SCP-2006 is not a rampaging demigod, nor is it a regenerating super lizard. However, it possesses the same level of danger as any other Keter that the Foundation has contained. Think of SCP-2006's purpose. It wishes to scare people. Imagine what would happen if SCP-2006 broke containment and found out what really scared people. Imagine if it saw the horror and fear of war, or the concepts of paranoia or phobias common to each and every human being. Imagine if it found the true horror of a nuclear holocaust or an XK class scenario. Now, couple that with an entity that possesses shape-shifting abilities with no known limits, and you'll understand why it's classified as Keter. So think back to what I had you imagine at the beginning of this entry. If 2006 were to escape, it would likely find you one day and enact the very thing that frightens you to your core. And once it comes across the more existential fears inside humans, oh boy. Number 5. SCP-2872. This SCP is usually an exceptional racehorse of excellent size and speed. Its record in the Kentucky Derby stands at 2 minutes 1 second, and it doesn't noticeably age. That aging thing aside, it doesn't usually exhibit any anomalous behavior. It just looks and acts like a regular racehorse. However, it must win the Kentucky Derby once every 5 years. If it does not find itself draped in roses within 5 years of winning its previous derby, it will become restless and start to run in large loops. Within 2 days, it'll be continuously running, getting faster and faster and faster until it's able to demolish any wall or fence in its way. Somehow, it is never physically harmed by any of these impacts while in this state. If it's left unimpeded, it will reach a top velocity of approximately 320 meters per second and will continuously run in loops across distances measuring hundreds of kilometers. This does not mean that it's unstoppable, however. If it hears the words, "Whoa boy," it will stop over a period of 50 meters. However, the sound must be adjusted to take into account the Doppler effect before it will have the desired effect. The horse was discovered at some point in the 60s when it caused over $30 million in damages. It was calmed down successfully by the owner at the time, and custody of SCP-2872 was transferred to the Foundation. The owner explained the 5-year principle and promptly skedaddled. He hasn't been seen since. Since then, the horse has hit what was assumed to be a top speed twice. However, the Foundation found a private stable and trainer who seemed to be adept at keeping the horse sedate and winning derbies. At some point in the 2010s though, it began to show agitation again. Tranquilizers were ineffective, and even the failsafe, whoa boy, did not work. SCP-2872 erupted from his cell, causing injuries and fatalities, and ran off into the wastelands. At some point, it achieved escape velocity and achieved liftoff. Yes, you heard me right. The horse ran so fast, defied gravity, right out into the solar system, out of our atmosphere and off into space. At this time, it is 10 light years away from our solar system and appears to have lost forward momentum. Current analysis suggests that it's turning back. Uh-oh. When I said it can never escape, I actually meant it can never escape the cold, dark nothingness of outer space, but apparently it's just that fast. I don't think Earth is ready for that kind of impact. Coming in at number 4, SCP-1498. You might want to reconsider counting sheep before falling asleep after I tell you about this one. SCP-1498 is a collection of 30 autonomous bundles of phone cords and handsets assembled in such a way that they resemble sheep. These twirly-corded creatures constantly wander around their containment chambers, ringing away every once in a while. If someone answers the phone or attempts to use the handset, they will hear 3 rings followed by a voice identifying themselves as an operator of the One-Eye Roy Collective. The operator will instruct the subject on various dreaming options and make suggestions for enhanced dreaming experiences. Once the call is ended, the subject will lose consciousness for 9 hours. That's more sleep than I've had all year, lucky bat. When they awake, the subject will claim to have experienced the exact dream they ordered. They will likely want to reuse the phone immediately. If someone uses this service repeatedly, the experience changes their bodily and mental state, and not for the better. They will want to sleep as often as possible and prefer to use the SCP to select their dreams. While they're sawing logs, parts of their skull will begin to be replaced by telephone parts. Sometimes this manifests through the coughing up of telephones, cords extending into their esophagus, wires growing in place of their hair, ringing devices being found in their ears, and their voices actually being replaced with dial tones. Doesn't sound like too much fun if you ask me. Imagine if these sheep were just out in the world, luring people in with a cure for insomnia and then replacing their body parts with phone pieces. I'm sure some folks would even do it voluntarily, knowing the risks. Eventually, a whole rotary phone will assemble itself on the subject's head, and then they will display the same intelligence as instances of SCP-1498. There have been no cases of human intelligence being restored in such cases. Hope the dreams were worth it. Coming in at number 3, we have SCP-4276. These next couple entries are particularly nasty insects who could very well be indistinguishable from their regularly occurring counterparts. Fair warning, you may never want to leave the house again. SCP-4276 is a tribe of insects similar to what is commonly known as the cuckoo wasp. They have many similarities, including kleptoparasitic breeding habits and structural coloration. However, this SCP can manifest in many more colors and has been known to grow larger than the non-anomalous variety. Its behavior is hard to distinguish from the average cuckoo wasp, save for an ability to grow to maturity much faster. Instead of hosting its larvae in eggs, SCP-4276 will introduce the baby bugs to both living and freshly killed animals. Yeesh. Recorded instances of this behavior have been found in 4 white-tailed deer, 2 desert cottontails, 1 red fox, 1 black bear, 1 German shepherd, and get this, 4 human males. Yup, those nasty will burrow into living humans. Is anyone else feeling itchy? The colony was originally discovered at the cottage of a hunter where wasps had infested the lodgings and burrowed into a man and 3 guests. Once they're ready to hatch, they burst forth from the flesh, leaving small holes all throughout the host. The colony was controlled with smoke and brought under the Foundation's custody, thank goodness. While researching the behavior of these horrifying insects, it was discovered that hatching and maturation can be accelerated through the use of noises exceeding 90 decibels or irregular or extreme illumination, sometimes a combination of both. This became all the more horrifying when another instance was introduced at the local high school's prom. Loud music, flashing lights, you do the math. Foundation account details a student being so full of these rapidly growing wasps that he exploded. It's like becoming a human hive. Now we know there's more than 1 colony, and they may not all be under Foundation custody. Excuse me as I go douse myself in gasoline. Coming in at number 2, SCP-775. If that last one gave you the heebie-jeebies, prepare yourself, because this one isn't any better. 775 is a variety of tick, significantly larger than most regular ticks. Most unengorged adults end up being around the size of a nickel. And if you've ever seen a normal tick, you should know that no tick should be that big. None. None of them. In addition to being huge, these ticks are resistant to crushing, cutting, and tearing, so anything you could do to kill a normal one won't be so effective here. Plus, They move fast. They're also capable of flattening themselves down to 25 millimeters to escape during tiny gaps and actually damaging concrete over time. These abilities would make any tiny bloodsucker extra awful, but just you wait, it gets way worse. Blood isn't the only thing on the menu, as these ticks inject an enzyme that liquefies other tissues. Bone, blood vessels, fats, all food for these buggers. The thing that they don't target is actually skin tissue. Once engorged with all of the host's gooey insides, it will lay an egg sac and resume feeding. And in fact, it will not stop feeding until the host is totally incapable of providing further nutrients. That means the hosts will be just hollowed out, leaving behind the outer layers of skin. Just imagine a totally deflated, like, human balloon, and you'll start to get the picture. But the skin doesn't just get left alone, the ticks will actually get to work laying more eggs. And this loose skin will eventually be totally filled to the brim with eggs, taking on bloated and misshapen forms. Eventually, the ticks will fill these nests beyond capacity and they will burst like a greasy zit. The accelerated life cycle of these nasties mean that they can constantly undergo population explosions. If left unchecked, they could potentially decimate populations within weeks. Bleach seems to be the only way of effectively killing them, and that's only when they're submerged for more than 5 minutes. The Foundation really has their hands full containing these ones. And lastly, number 1, SCP-2316. Before you continue watching, please confirm that you do not recognize the bodies in the water. It is extremely important that you do not recognize the bodies in the water. This SCP is a cognitohazard, meaning that just knowing details about it can cause you to fall under its effect. Even though its escape is not likely to ever happen, knowledge most definitely will be shared at some point, like right now, and this compounds the danger. It manifests as a group of human corpses floating at the surface of the water in a lake. The lake has been quarantined and fenced off and is constantly patrolled by guards with no knowledge of this SCP. The identities of the bodies cannot be shared due to the risk of cognitive damage, and the DNA tests have proven inconclusive. Remember, you do not recognize the bodies in the water. While they do appear as individual instances, it is theorized that the bodies may actually be an entity comprised of a collective consciousness. Those who have viewed it or are aware of its nature believe that the individual instances are human beings that they recognize, typically from their childhood. Attempting to come in contact with these instances will cause other bodies to appear. Additional instances serve to reinforce and add to the strength of the cognitohazard, which compels affected individuals into the water. Individuals who enter the lake this way are lost, and none of them have ever been recovered. No, they are not just going for a swim. One last time, you do not recognize the bodies in the water. Or do you? Coming in at number 5, we have SCP-659. If you saw Finding Nemo while still a child, you know very well how terrifying waterfowl with a group mentality can be. I get flashbacks every time someone says mine, but those gulls have nothing on the horrifying herons I'm about to introduce to you. SCP-659 is a species of birds resembling herons that display modular intelligence. I'll get to what that means in a second. There's only one flock known to the Foundation, and they seem to be native to North America, although there have been unconfirmed sightings in Europe. These birds can subsist on any meat they can find, but will stick to fish if it's available. When an individual specimen is isolated from the flock, it acts just like any other heron would. It's more intelligent than your average feathered friend, however, as it can solve simple problems, use tools, and learn very quickly. Now, to bring us back to modular intelligence, when more than one of these birds comes near each other, they gain combined intelligence. The more birds there are together, the smarter they become. It seems that there's an approximately 25-meter limit to this particular talent though. They don't have a hive mind, nor do they display telepathic abilities, but flocks are extremely well coordinated in their actions. If enough birds gather, they display human-like intelligence and sapience, and can actually learn at a faster rate than most humans. Some birds have even been documented learning French and English. They have used these smarts to break out of Foundation containment on multiple occasions. Upon being brought back in, Foundation researchers found that keeping each heron isolated at the distance exceeding 25 meters prevents them from gaining enough intelligence to escape. And all this seems pretty cool, right? Like, those are some pretty neat birds. Well, SCP-659 and all of its instances are vigorously hostile towards humans, and it's probably our fault. Before the first recorded containment, flocks in the wild did not display any sort of aggression towards humans. However, as detailed in Incident 659A, these birds are none too happy about being contained. Following a containment breach that resulted in the death of all on-site personnel save a few, the murderous birds were interviewed by a researcher. They had pecked holes in the tires of all vehicles, cut phone lines, and actually actually sent a flying sentry up to keep watch over the facility. When asked why they did this, one heron stepped up to the glass and wrote messages in blood from another heron in containment at the time. The messages were, "Don't act like don't know. You started this," and freedom. No one tell Tippy Hedren. Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-772. If the bugs from last time didn't get your skin crawling, this one sure will. 772 is a gigantic species of wasp, possibly dating back to prehistoric times. Dino wasps, if you will. A mature adult is typically 60 centimeters and can actually reach up to 70 when the antenna and ovipositor are included. They have extremely tough exoskeletons that are actually resistant to gunfire. This wasp has been shot and survived. Something tells me a raid might not work either. These humongous insects will fly around and deposit their eggs in large mammals, leaving the larvae to hatch and eat their way out. Using their sharp and maneuverable egg tube, they can lay between 5 and 20 eggs all around 6 centimeters in length and 2.5 centimeters in width, before leaving the incisions to heal. So they can also use their pointy end as a weapon and stab their victims repeatedly, sometimes even resulting in bone penetration. I usually prefer my bones unpenetrated, thank you very much. The eggs will then incubate for 4 to 12 days, and as they grow nearer to hatching, the stress levels in the host will go up. You know, the kind of stress that happens when baby wasps are about to hatch under your skin and eat their way out. If you go and see a doctor, it's likely that they will mistake the bugs as abscesses or tumors. And what's extra fun about this bit is that as they burrow deeper into you, it'll seem like the lumps are just going away on their own. Nothing to worry about here, just becoming a host body for half-meter yellow jackets. The etymologist that discovered 772 actually cut himself open when he realized what would happen. They remain carnivorous even after their pupal state and can sometimes become cannibalistic in resource deficient environments. Thankfully, all reported instances of this SCP are under Foundation control now, hermetically sealed in a chamber with a maximum capacity of 15 wasps to keep them from getting unruly. They've been known to break out of enclosures before. Hopefully the incineration failsafe stays operational. Kill it with fire, always a good option. Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-274. If Banksy and an SCP had a baby, this would be it. A can of spray paint with many variable colors. This SCP has the consistency of normal paint. Grossly enough, it has been discovered that the composition is actually 28% hemoglobin, 12% gastric acid, and then 60% regular paint. Once sprayed all over a wall, it will spread until it covers the entire wall and any walls attached. This usually takes the form of large and disturbing designs. Any building taken over by it will be converted into an organism that functions similarly to the species of the Anthozoa class. Common examples of this would be anemones, stony corals, and soft corals. Buildings infected by SCP-274 are predatory and will lure victims in by emitting alarming noises. Broken glass, loud coughing, painful whines, and whimpers will be heard by all passerby. Once a human enters, these noises will stop immediately. Victims are then suctioned into the building's newly formed gastrovascular cavity and often grabbed by entities known as SCP-274-2. These are humanoid figures wearing gas masks that can flatten out and take the form of graffiti. Our gas mask wearing assailants will spray victims in the eyes and mouth with SCP-274, which has a blinding and numbing effect. It's assumed that victims are then assimilated into other instances of SCP-274-2. If there are too many of these particular humanoids in any given building, one will have to leave and then go and spray a new one. If left unchecked, it is estimated that they could take over a large city in less than a month. Currently, Foundation Task Force Pi-1, aka City Slickers, is watching all known instances preventing folks from entering, and they're also burning down the infected buildings. Coming in at number 2, we have SCP-2675. Russia. This SCP is a Soviet-made Arctica-class nuclear-powered icebreaker ship named Sibir. Official records say it was retired, but later it was found out that it disappeared while investigating an anomalous artifact in the Arctic Ocean. It can spontaneously change shape, add new structures, equipment, and weaponry. It also generates neutron radiation. The water around it is often seen glowing blue. This shape-shifting ship can also vanish from one location and manifest elsewhere. The limits and nature of this power are currently unknown, although the use of it often coincides with a spike in radiation. Unfortunately, this kick-ass ship is hostile and dangerous. Come on, can't we just have some cool stuff? On board is a discrete entity known as SCP-2675-1. It appears to be an adult human male fluent in Russian, French, and English. Intelligent and violent, he claims to be a herald of a previously undocumented god. In a transmission from the ship, 2675-1 announces that he sails for the godchild, born of the atom. He and his crew are no longer life, but time and energy. Based on information from other transmissions and reports, we have a vague idea of how he and the ship came to be. At some point while investigating the anomaly in the Arctic Ocean, something must have happened in the nuclear power source aboard the Sibir. This vaporized everyone on board, but eventually they rematerialized in this kind of host entity. Think like a Dr. Manhattan at sea. Those who were and reconstructed now see nuclear power as a godchild who needs to be cradled and cared for, whose love needs to be shared with all men. So this seafaring blue ghoul wants everyone to be broken down into atoms so they can finally see the warmth and love of the atomic godchild. Love it. And finally, number 1, SCP-2521. This one is absolutely fascinating, and if you haven't heard of it already, I would highly recommend checking out the original report on the SCP Wiki. Unfortunately, I am dooming myself and all of you by speaking about it aloud. Knowledge is power, but the way that this one works means we're all screwed. Sorry. Stop listening now if you enjoy living and breathing with a grand total of 0 tentacles pulling you into an unknown zone. Okay, SCP-2521 is a humanoid entity over 2 meters in height with sticky tendrils at the end of each arm. It appears to be black or dark gray with an odd little pentagon-shaped head. It can pass through solid objects, and as such is very difficult to contain. It absolutely loves collecting information about itself, and really likes when people discuss it out loud. Any instance of written or spoken information about SCP-2521 can be sensed by it, and will promptly be collected. Yes, this includes people who know and speak about it. Where does it take this information? Nobody knows. Personally, I like the idea that it takes all of this information to some unnamed location and protects it, kinda like a dragon hoarding gold. Thankfully for the Foundation, SCP-2521 doesn't seem to understand anything done up in symbols or pictographs. Pictures, videos, signs, and graphics are all fair game too. So considering now that I have been speaking very candidly about our tentacled friend, I should probably get going. Stick to symbols, folks. Coming in at number 5, we've got SCP-939. We're gonna start off with a doozy, because this SCP is best described as a big, ugly, red, bloody, unhinged jawfish cave thing with memory loss powers. That's a mouthful, I know, but it's all true. And the last thing you want is for it to get a mouthful of you. Multiple iterations of this lovely cave dweller exist, and they are capable of bearing young, so they can multiply. How nice. 939 is an endothermic pack-based predator adapted to cave life. Its skin is highly permeable to moisture and is a translucent red color thanks to a chemical compound similar to hemoglobin. Kinda like a living blood sausage if you're into that kind of thing. I've heard they're quite delicious, but now I'm thinking about food instead of SCPs. These weird red troglobites are about 2.2 meters tall and weigh around 250 kilograms. They have 4 limbs, each ending with 3 claws and an opposable 4th digit. 939's extremities are covered in short, bristly hair-like structures which are great for climbing. Each has an elongated skull with no eyes or eye sockets, not even a brain casing to be found. But their jaws are lined with red, luminescent fang-like teeth, kind of like a viper fish. That's an ugly sucker right there. Along their dorsal ridges run eye spots and spiny protrusions that are sensitive to light and air pressure respectively. They are likely used to navigate the caves they seem so adapted to and seek out prey. The weird thing about their prey-seeking tendencies though is that they have no apparent need to feed. These hemoglobin hobgoblins are without vital organ systems. No central or peripheral nervous systems, no circulatory systems, no digestive tract. So they have no way of digesting the tissue that they consume, and instead they let it accumulate in their respiratory system till there's too much and then they regurgitate it. Nothing sexier than regurgitating festering meat from your lungs, right? SCP-939 is able to imitate human speech as well, an ability that it uses primarily to lure in victims. It will pretend to be distressed with voices so perfectly imitated biometric voice recognition systems can't tell it apart from whatever it's mimicking. When prey is close enough, it will kill with a single bite to the cranium or neck, usually measured in excess of 35 megapascals. Sometimes I think it would be nice to have my head placed in a hydraulic press, you know? On top of all these horrifying details, 939 also produces an aerosolized Class C amnestics of its own accord. No memories will form for the duration of exposure and for an additional 30 minutes after. Terrifying visage, the ability to play copycat, a skull-crushing bite, and memory inhibition. Let's just say you wouldn't want to meet one of these guys while out spelunking. Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-1313. I always thought math was pretty scary on its own. Through my schooling, I found solace in English, philosophy, media studies, but never math. My brain just isn't wired for that kind of thought. Thankfully so, too. I could have been in grave danger had I been too keen on algebra and arithmetic. SCP-1313 is an anomalous series of logical processes capable of being defined as a mathematical equation to which the answer is a single female specimen of Ursus arctos, aka a grizzly bear. I think the proper designation for a grizzly bear is Ursus arctos horribilis, but we'll leave that be for now. In layman's terms, what this means is if you reach the correct answer to the mathematical equation that SCP-1313 represents, a grizzly bear will manifest somewhere close by and start to do what grizzly bears do. Not something you want to deal with in homeroom. The numerical anomaly first came to the Foundation's attention in 1967 when a bear attack was recorded at White Cross High School. Since then, over 1,700 separate incidences of bear attacks in educational institutes has been observed, with over 1,600 fatalities and 20% of the bears still at large. Half solving the problem won't summon any predatory mammals, and there's no way to return the bear to numerical form by solving the inverse. So if you're gonna follow through with this piece of math homework, just be sure you're well equipped to fight a 200-kilogram mama bear. And if you feel that you've personally begun to figure out this equation, get yourself some amnestics as soon as possible. The problem doesn't need to be physically represented. Even solving it in your head will result in the manifestation of a bear. I always knew math was unbearable. I'll see myself out. Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-638. Wine and meat. That's the good life, right? Cures what ails you, heals all wounds. Well, if you were to believe SCP-638, then that would be the case. 638 is a male human with a slim build. He's hairless and extensively scarred thanks to a fire that he was found in the remains of. It heals at an abnormal rate, directly proportional to the consumption of raw flesh and wine. Often, 638 will issue demands in the form of 1 or 2 word shouts. In the past, the demands have been things like wine, ivy, olive trees, grass for the floor, freedom, women, live animals, a drum, a flute, and a view of the sky. Apparently this guy knows how to live the good life. If these demands are not met, he will become violent and exhibit short bursts of great strength and speed. He's been known to dent steel, easily lift and throw grown men, break restraints, and shout with great force and volume. These shouts can shatter glass and deafen people, even blowing a steel door off its hinges at one point. Fortunately, these outbursts lead to lethargy if he's left without food and wine, so starvation's a pretty effective behavioral control. This SCP, while obviously physically anomalous, has one ability that stands out above the rest. 683 has a strong psychic or empathic influence over women within a radius of about 20 meters. Any woman within that range will be compelled to be in its presence, and once there will lose all inhibition. This often manifests through intense dancing, jumping, and shouting. If they're allowed to continue on, they will dance until they drop from exhaustion. Attempts to remove female subjects result in violent responses from both 638 and affected subjects. This SCP will use these folks in aid to escape, as subjects will also demonstrate greater physical prowess along with a higher level of adrenaline. Once removed from his influence, subjects demonstrate full memory of their actions and often feel intense shame if it's not something they would have otherwise done. The jury is still out on how the influence works, whether psychic or empathic, but could be something else entirely. In the meantime, hide your kids, hide your wife, because he's influencing everyone out there. Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-076. I like to think of this one as being like a Terminator without the influence of Skynet. Less metal parts too, I guess. 076 is actually classified as 2 things, a stone cube and the humanoid entity contained within. The cube is covered in engraved patterns with no known origin, with 21 locks on the door. Inside is a human male estimated to be in his late 20s. He's got black hair, gray eyes, and olive skin. All over his body are tattoos depicting arcane and occult imagery. He's commonly referred to as Abel, and for simplicity's sake, I'll refer to him as such. Abel is technically dead while encased in the stone cube. Every once in a while, he will awaken human and reanimate with all human vital signs. He'll then seek out the nearest human and enter a rage state in which all humans encountered are fought to the death. The only way to end this rampage is by killing Abel. This proves to be very difficult though, as he possesses superhuman physical abilities and is able to ignore pain and shock. He's been seen carrying on through seemingly deadly injuries, ripping through reinforced security doors, clearing 64 meters in under 3 seconds, taking multiple 50 cal rounds to the head and continuing to fight, swatting lower cal bullets out of the air with rebar, surviving without oxygen for more than an hour, and materializing bladed weapons out of nowhere. Is my Terminator comparison making more sense? Even when he dies, he'll turn to dust and then reform in the coffin over a period of time between 6 hours and 25 years. The lad has nothing but contempt for human beings and will fight tooth and nail to keep killing. There's a weird connection between SCP-076 and 073, and under no circumstances should they be allowed to meet. Here's hoping they keep a close eye on this one, because I'm not down to die gloriously in combat against a superhuman. Not yet, anyways. And finally, number 1, SCP-2440. I am pretty sure that I've already fallen under the influence of this one. Yep. Even before I tell you more, it's likely that you have too. Anyone into SCPs has a higher chance than most to sustain 2440 infection. Let me explain why. This SCP is an extra-dimensional entity whose power increases proportional to the number of people aware of it. Using a mimetic agent that can be inserted into any source of information, this SCP can control the actions of the infected to some degree. Once it reaches a certain level of awareness, it can extend its influence past infected individuals. I'll run down the scale that it seemingly works by. At fewer than 200 infected, the individuals influenced will demonstrate a heightened interest in horror, fantasy, and sci-fi media. They'll express interest in writing and sharing these works, which increases the infection rate. See where I'm going with this? You've probably already stumbled across some of the mimetic agent already. Meme warfare people with horror, sci-fi, and fantasy at the core. Once it amasses over 500 people, it can overtake the body of an infected individual and speak to all infected individuals at the same time. On its journey to 10,000, it gains reality-bending characteristics and becomes capable of manifesting itself outside of a host for short periods of time. Currently, the Foundation believes this SCP to have amassed over 10,000 people, meaning that it can control up to 1,000 individuals at one time. If it keeps up the exponential spread of the mimetic agent, it could control a projected 1 million people. This would lead to an XK class scenario, as the anomaly would be fully capable of manifesting itself outside of a host. We'd all be subject to its powers, and humanity would fall totally under its control. The Foundation is currently administrating anti-mimetics and amnestics to all found to be connected to this, but it is tough to contain the spread of information. The internet tends to be resistant to censorship after all. An organization known as the Children of God worship 2440 and spread its materials as often as possible. So yeah, I don't know how long we have before this one eclipses the Foundation. Maybe there's Foundation materials already infected by the mimetic. In that case, enjoy what time you have left and prepare to bask in the glory of 2440, our meme god. Seems about right in 2019. Starting us off at number 5, we've got SCP-439. Who here is a fan of the worst torture imaginable? I don't know about you folks, but being immobilized and subjected to immeasurable pain is not exactly my cup of tea. No judgment, you know, everyone's got something, but stick with me and I'll introduce you to an SCP that will make your skin crawl like never before. Actually, I don't know if your skin could crawl after this one's done with you. SCP-439 is a grayish earwig that loves to crawl into the mouths of sleeping humans, all the way down into their lungs. If encountered while awake, it presents no more of a threat than a normal earwig. However, once this thing climbs down a sleeping person's trachea, it will settle in and subject you to a world of hurt. The first few hours after waking, the host will complain of chest pains and shortness of breath, followed by abdominal cramping. This tightness in their chest will worsen and a fever will rise until the host is incapacitated. At this point, the host will develop a disorder that's usually genetic and promotes additional bone growth into people's muscle tissue. This happens very rapidly and is extremely painful, often with bone spurs protruding through the host's flesh. The host will then seek shelter in a dark, enclosed space like a heating duct or a cupboard. In the first 3 days, without treatment, the host will become completely withdrawn and immobile due to pain and difficulty breathing. This is the final stage of the transformation on the host's journey to becoming a bone hive. Let that phrase sit with you for a moment. Bone hive. Okay. The host then enters the fetal position and their skeletal structure shifts until they are roughly spherical in shape, while new protrusions anchor them into place. Now unrecognizable, they've been converted into a sort of cage to protect their internal organs and the bustling new earwig colony within. The earwigs will preserve little bits of the brain and digestive tract to ensure that these organs still function, and they actually use the host's intestines to process materials into a nutritive slurry for the colony. The queen will produce between 20 and 30,000 offsprings as workers, drones, and warriors, just crawling around inside your bony body. Eventually a new queen will emerge and the colony will burst forth from the hive in search of a new host. And when I say burst, I mean they'll actually tear their way out. All but the queen will die over the next little while, and then the host will eventually starve to death. Yes, the host is actually still alive while all of this is happening. Experimentation suggests that they're actually still semi-conscious during the process as well, which a fate worse than death, to say the least. Filling out our number 4 slot, we've got SCP-3199. Colloquially referred to as eggheads, these are big, weird, bald chickens that could very well end the world if left unchecked. These giant humanoid fowl clock in at around 3 meters tall and weigh almost 800 kilograms when fully grown. They're thick. Just look at their SCP picture. They can run at speeds averaging 25 kilometers per hour, and upon contact with a human or animal subject, they will liquefy the internal organs and bone structure. This disgusting cadaver will then be brought and fed to the younger eggheads. Their reproductive cycle is what causes them to be so fearful, as there doesn't seem to be a limit to how many times these things can reproduce. They seem to do this asexually as well, meaning that they can just go on and on without, any other contact. So get this, any instance of 3199, fully grown or not, has an egg in them at all times. They will produce them often through a process in which the egg passes through the stomach, up the esophagus, and then it is vomited out of the mouth along with a viscous red corrosive substance. While this is happening, the chicken folk show extreme discomfort and emit sounds not dissimilar to screams. These large, rubbery off-white eggs are extremely resilient and have proven to be resistant to blunt force trauma, pressure in excess of 180,000 pounds per square inch, high precision blades, and long-term acid exposure. While it's easy enough to dispatch an egg head, the eggs themselves are hard to destroy. And the fact that they can reproduce at extreme rates means that this could easily represent an XK class scenario via overpopulation. Imagine living in a world where everywhere you look you see awful flabby chicken manticores vomiting eggs and acid. Although I wonder if the chickens fry up nice. That could be useful. Coming in at number 3, we have SCP-4616. This one's kind of an odd one, even for an SCP. It's a humanoid entity with superhuman strength and speed, and it actively avoids and destroys any and all surveillance equipment, meaning that nobody has actually acquired any high-resolution images or video of it. Hangs around farmhouses with properties that include wooded areas. It'll chill out at the edge of the woods during the day and wave with its right hand at anyone present, but it'll retreat into the woods if approached. At night, it leaves the woods to inspect the farm. During these expeditions, 4616 will actually do useful farm work. It'll rearrange objects and sometimes damage property and livestock. It will also bang and scrape on the farmhouse trying to gain entry. Any farmhouse resident who's outdoors during the nocturnal excursion will be abducted by the beast. Never taking more than one person during any given night, it will then drag their victim into the woods. Anyone who attempts to leave the property will be abducted as well. In fact, if anyone other than the farm's residents attempt to enter the property, they'll be beaten to a literal pulp. Yes, reports have shown that victims of an attack end up as a semi-fluid pulp. Those are the words that are in the report. Imagine the noises that might make. Just if the farmhouse that it's monitoring becomes empty or otherwise defunct, it will move on to the nearest wooded farmland and begin again. For the longest time, abductees were never recovered from the woods once abducted. However, more recently a ring of 37 oak saplings appeared on the lawn of a Foundation monitored farmhouse. At the base of each tree was what appeared to be a freshly dug grave, and inside was a well-preserved human body. Acorns had been implanted in the victims while they were still alive, and the tree was allowed to grow within them, developing a complex network of roots deep into their bodies. It's unclear as to how long the victims were alive with the trees growing within them. For now, the Foundation is staffing the current farmhouse with D-class personnel with agriculture experience, cycling new members in via hidden tunnel. They're expected to return to the farmhouse by sunset and remain indoors until sunrise. They've noticed that 4616 has become a little more aggressive though. Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-1155. More cursed graffiti, call the street sweepers. 1155 manifests as a work of street art depicting the form of a humanoid owl creature. nature. It has sinewy forelimbs, claw-like hands, and often tends towards a predatory stance with eyes that seem to follow the viewer, kind of like any given portrait in a haunted house. Anyone who sees this image is compelled to investigate more closely, and if they approach within 2 meters, they will be subjected to a violent attack. This attack generally takes around 6 seconds and involves lacerations, dismemberment of extremities, whole or partial removal of soft body parts, and penetrating head trauma consistent with those inflicted by a large beak or talons. These attacks will not occur if the victim remains in sight of another person, and if the sightline is re-established while the attack is underway, it will halt. This is not recommended though, because the victim will die regardless, whether through shock or blood loss. If the attack is allowed to conclude, both victim and painting will vanish. There is yet to be an instance of victim retrieval, but the painting itself will reappear somewhere within 7 days. Whenever discovered, the area surrounding the painting must be quarantined, as completely enclosing it causes the relocation process to happen quickly. If you attempt to destroy or paint over it, it will also relocate. The Foundation constantly observes 1155 from a remote location while doing their best to keep civilians away from danger. Has anyone seen Velvet Buzzsaw? And finally at number 1, we've got SCP-4666. For this last one, let's get into the Christmas spirit, hey folks. 4666 is a long-lived humanoid of unknown origin. It's over 2 meters tall and appears to be an extremely emaciated, naked man of European descent, capable of instantaneous or near instantaneous teleportation to any location north of 40 degrees north latitude. The Foundation has no idea how to properly contain this one. Every year, this SCP will become active for a period of 12 days between December 21st and January 2nd. This is known as a Weissnacht event. 4666 will appear at dwellings in 1 or more locations, always at family homes and isolated rural areas. The family must have at least 1 child under the age of 8, and that area must have snow cover that lasts the duration of the event. For the first 7 nights, children will report seeing it somewhere near the family dwelling, whether watching from across a field or at the edge of a nearby forest. They will also report waking up and seeing it watching them sleep through the window. Nights 8 through 11 will involve family members hearing footsteps coming from the roof or attic and an unpleasant odor permeating throughout the house. No cause will be found, making the parents suspect that they are being stalked or haunted. On the 12th day of Christmas, 466 gave to me 2 scenarios. The more common scenario involves all family members being killed, save for 1 young child who was then kidnapped. It will inflict incapacitating injuries to the family members while they sleep and then herd them into a single room where it kills them all ritualistically in front of each other. The kidnapped children are brought to an unknown location and forced to make toys. If they don't work hard enough, 4666 will kill them or hurt them very badly. The remains are then used to make more toys. Yikes. The less common 12th day involves the family remaining unharmed and the children receiving gifts in the form of toys crafted from these remains of human children. Bad Santa, my ass. This thing gives Krampus a run for its money. Joy to the world and all that jazz. Coming in at number 5, we have SCP-1249. Okay, so at first this one isn't going to seem too scary. It's a cute little fennec fox. Like, come on, it's adorable. But keep in mind that the Foundation keeps only 1 of these under lock and key and literally incinerates the rest. Yes, they take these tiny foot-long foxes and they throw them into the incinerator to prevent them from being spread across the world. Why would they do something so barbaric? Well, I'll tell you why. Because these things are dangerous and deadly. While appearing to be identical to a non-anomalous fennec fox, SCP-1249 is comprised entirely of fungal material. This mushroomy stuff has replicated the skin, skeleton, and fur of a fox, while its internal structure consists of a thick mold of varying viscosity. Ugh. It is constantly exhaling a toxin containing heavy amounts of psilocybin and muscimol. So if you take a liking to this fox and you decide to hang out around it, you'll be exposed to this aerosolized toxin. After 2 minutes of exposure, an exposed subject will enter a consistently increasing state of euphoria until removed from 1249's presence. After 5 minutes, they will become highly resistant to pain and begin to behave similarly to those under the influence of psychedelics. Yeah, this fuzzy little pal, I'll get you high. Some of you might be down for that, but not for what happens next. If the fox sees a subject in this inebriated state, they will lie on or against the subject. Soon after this cuddling begins, 1249's skin will appear to melt and grow over the subject. It will then completely envelop its prey and shift it towards its abdomen. There is no known limit to what this tiny guy can envelop, and it is capable of processing over 190 metric tons of food in 1 week. The oddest thing is that the fox will only eat live prey in this matter. It will eat dead subjects and processed food just like a regular fox would. So if these adorable little rascals were allowed to roam free, they would weasel their way into the homes of cute animal lovers everywhere, take them on a wicked trip, and then eat them. Sounds like a girl I knew in university. Filling out our number 4 slot, we have SCP-1536. These odd little ovals have major implications if you really think about it. Usually they just crawl around on the ground using their 2 weird arthropod legs, but something very interesting happens if they're presented with a direct line of sight to a sufficiently complex moving object. 1536 will alter its composition and appearance to match that of the object, effectively transforming into whatever the target is. While in this active state, it will be identical in every measurable aspect, from DNA to skin markings to even memory and personality. It even has the same life requirements, whether that be food and water, oxygen, etc. If it can sustain itself, 1536 will remain in this transformed state indefinitely, acting just as whatever it copied would. Damage and wounds will be sustained as well, and if the object is killed, it will return to its inactive state. It can't copy something from an image or a recording and needs about 16 minutes to cool down after returning to an inactive state before it can mimic once again. Who knows what these things are thinking when dragging themselves around on the ground prior to transformation? Is there a reason they do this? Do they have some sort of evil agenda? Plus, once a human is copied, it essentially becomes self-sustaining to the same degree that the person it copied is, so it can probably find food and avoid danger. What would happen when 2 of these identical clones come face to face? What if an important public figure is copied and it becomes impossible to tell them apart? What if it copies another extremely volatile SCP? These are questions I definitely don't want the answers to. Keep it locked up, throw away the key. Now at number 3, we have SCP-2774. Do you remember the sloth from Zootopia? Could you live like that every day? Slow reaction times, no emotion, a lack of ability to make high-level decisions. I know I couldn't. But if you ever come in contact with the mimetic agent 2774-A, you're gonna end up that way. SCP-2774 is any medium that contains 2774-A, which is a mimetic image of an unknown humanoid entity wearing a sloth costume. Once you see this image, the effects will set in between 40 and 100 hours after exposure. Once fully realized, you'll lose all ability to use your cognitive functions or make higher level decisions, save for a period of about 150 seconds every 24 hours. So basically, you're walking around on autopilot with 0 input until you get this short 2.5 minute window. Sounds like hell if I'm gonna be perfectly honest. Subjects who have already been exposed would tell you that it is. During their 150 seconds of lucidity, they're often agitated and fearful, and it's common for sufferers to act irrationally and express dread at the permanence of their situation. More often than not, they will beg someone to kill them or act in ways that would expedite death. At this point, the Foundation has found that the most humane thing to do is terminate the victims. Might be the first truly humane thing the Foundation's ever done. If you're colorblind, count your lucky stars. The image only retains anomalous properties if it contains hues of red and green. And for whatever reason, it has not been found online yet, just in media like movies, TV, and magazines. Home videos too. So all you young folks out there need not worry, the memes on the internet are still safe. Or at least as safe as they were before you knew about this one. Coming in at number 2, SCP-3998. Now this one is a scarecrow made up of very burned human body parts, held together by wicker, nails, and wire. It seems that it originated sometime in the late 17th century, but it still remains very much intact. This burned barnyard accessory constantly exudes flammable liquid from its bones, consisting of human fat and ethanol. Every night between 11 PM and 4 AM, 3998 ignites and is engulfed in flame. Even though the flames are quite intense, it sustains no structural damage. If nobody's nearby, it's no big deal. But if somebody is nearby and meets a set of criteria, they will also spontaneously ignite. As they burn, large quantities of ethanol will appear and start to boil in their stomach, inducing vomiting and causing further external burns, nerve damage, and organ damage. Eventually their body fat will begin to melt, and if they're left to burn long enough, the melted fat-ethanol combo will cause the stomach to violently rupture, often splitting the victim in two. These flames cannot be extinguished until 3998 is also extinguished. So that's pretty violent, right? Burning to death while vomiting ethanol? Well, thankfully, if you're a nice person, it won't affect you. It appears that only people who have killed or physically abused a romantic partner are targeted by these effects. So honestly, this thing's doing us all a favor. Although, if it appeared in a city center, we might have an issue. It could burn the whole place to the ground. And finally, at number 1, SCP-2852. Now this one is really terrifying to me, even though I don't consider myself any of the denominations it targets. This SCP will show up to various Catholic and Anglican religious functions, and even though it has never been seen by any attendees before, it will be treated like an established member of the family. 2852 looks like a white, middle-aged male and is comprised of human cells. However, it has no identifiable organs and its eyes are set into the sockets without any nerve connections. They're just kind of rolling around in there. It also speaks in a word salad. It never makes any sense, but all who interact with it will perceive it as acting normally and speaking intelligently. They'll also always refer to it as Cousin Johnny. Okay. Different terrible things will happen when it appears at baptisms, weddings, or funerals, known as blue, white, and black events respectively. The Foundation has attempted to restrict their access to events in the past, but they'll just appear inside if they're barred from entry. Depending on the event, strange things will happen when this SCP appears. Sometimes a bridal party will remove all their teeth and feed them to newlyweds. Sometimes blood is vomited into an open casket along with cicada guts. And sometimes a child's skin will slip off as if they were molting. No matter what, all in attendance will be negatively affected in major ways, ranging from higher suicide rates to sterility to developing violent personality disorders. It's actually theorized that a great deal of D-class subjects have actually been involved in these events in the past, which is why they act the way they do. Oof, it just sends a shiver down my spine knowing that any event could be attended by one of these things, and there's really nothing that can be done about it. Plus, the eating of teeth really messes me up. Just imagine chewing on a tooth for a moment. No. Keep these people impersonators away. Yikes. All sorts of stuff you would rather the Foundation just incinerated like a fennec fox, right? But hey, that's the kind of world we live in.